Well, here we go again. Summer of Love 2.0. I honestly don't even want to report on this because it's everywhere. You can't turn on your TV or go on YouTube without having to see something about this. But it's part of California, part of current events, and that's why I'm here. In 2020, riots raged across the country, starting in Minnesota because of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. At first, even Republicans were in favor of the Black Lives Matter movement. Quickly, it dwindled to now it is wildly unpopular, below 30% approval. So I don't understand why we're going through this again. We all saw the footage in 2020 of burning buildings, looting, rioting, people losing their lives, and being called mostly peaceful. They're doing the same script again, calling this mostly peaceful, but not using these exact words. They're saying a significant amount is peaceful and it's a small minority that is being disruptive. And that might be the case. A significant amount of people are probably just there thinking they're fighting the good fight and being useful idiots, for lack of better terms. However, the minority are violent and destructive and causing chaos and actually putting officers' lives at risk. And not just ICE agents, but LAPD and the Sheriff's Department just trying to keep the peace. By the time I'm recording this, the current presidential administration has called in the National Guard, 700 Marines, and the city of Los Angeles is under curfew. This is what I don't understand. Why are we protesting and rioting and attacking police officers and federal agents for illegal immigrants? I don't understand. The second they came into this country illegally, they committed a federal offense. They broke the law. They circumvented the legal process of entering this country. They cut the line. There are people in refugee camps. There are people putting in their applications and doing the right thing to become citizens. And these people just cut the line. Think about it. If you were at a restaurant waiting to get a table for hours, and then there's some people, this family, came in through the back door. They ended up getting a table, your table, that you've been waiting for, and they get served their food. And then on top of that, they sit there and complain about the food and the service, and then they get their table comped and they get their meal for free. That's essentially what is happening. So I don't understand why we are protesting people who have broken the law. They are not entitled to any constitutional rights. Zero. Those are for citizens, law-abiding, tax-paying citizens. They have rights as human beings. They have a right to be returned safely back to their country of origin. Violent criminals have the right to be sent back and given due process in their own country. It all seems pretty obvious and logical to me. Showing pictures of crying women and high school kids getting deported with their dad, yeah, that's unfortunate, but it's all emotional and it's irrational. Like the story about a Massachusetts student, Marcelo Gomez da Silva. He was detained by ICE because he was just walking to volleyball practice. Well, that's not the story. One, they were looking for his father, who was a criminal and illegal. They happened to find him on an expired visa, so he is also illegal. The emotional argument is, well, he was legal. All he had was an expired visa. Let me put it to you this way. If you had a driver's license and it expired and you didn't renew it and you drove with your driver's license expired anyway, what do you think is going to happen? By law, you will get pulled over, your car will get towed, your license will be suspended for a year, and you would have a court date. And it's a misdemeanor. The DMV gives you ample amount of time to go and renew your license. There's no excuse. This is the same thing. Renew your visa. Simple. Everything else is emotional, and these riots and protests are just cases of tribalism, and I don't understand it. Which brings me to my next point about tribalism. I don't understand the foreign flag, specifically the Mexican flag. The Mexican flag represents a sovereign nation, an independent sovereign nation, not a culture, not a race, not an ethnicity, a nation. If you love Mexico so much, if you love that country so much, and you're so proud to be Mexican, there's nothing or anyone stopping you from going over there. Seriously.
So let me get this straight, just so I could clarify it. You don't want to go back to Mexico. You're protesting to stay away from Mexico. But you're waving the Mexican flag and you're waving it with pride. You're waving it in the United States, the country you're trying to stay in, the country you don't want to leave. but yet you're waving the Mexican flag with pride. Okay. That seems normal to you? That seems logical? That's not stupid at all? None of that's stupid. All right. You guys are an embarrassment to the Mexican culture and to the United States culture. You guys are an embarrassment to everybody around you, and you should be ashamed of yourself.
So I grew up in Los Angeles. I grew up in North Hollywood. It was a really rough area, mainly Latino Hispanic, which I am. And it always confused me to see families and kids walking around with the flag, but living in this country. And not just living in this country, taking advantage of the services provided, the infrastructure, the schooling, the healthcare, the entitlements, like the welfare system, essentially. Which brings me to my next question, which confuses me even more. Why do we conflate illegal immigrants with immigrants? We lump them all together, or at least liberals, leftists, and Democrats do. They are two completely different categories, two completely different people. Illegal immigrants and immigrants are two different things. Why do we put them together into one category? And with that being said, no one is telling these people who come from another country who immigrated here to get rid of their culture, their heritage, their food. No one is saying that. I, for one, really like Japanese food. I like Asian cuisine. I'd be pretty upset if we didn't have sushi here in the States. All that is asked is to come into this country, be a law-abiding citizen, contribute, don't commit crimes, be an American, and assimilate. Don't turn these pockets and neighborhoods into a carbon copy of what you left. These little neighborhood pockets everywhere kind of fit the definition of a colony. What is a colony? Well, according to Merriam-Webster, the definition of a colony is a group of people who settle in a new, often distant territory, but remain under the political, economic, or cultural control of their parent country. In layman's terms, a body of people living in a new territory but retaining ties with the parent state. Pretty familiar, right? Sounds pretty spot on. People from a certain country migrate to this country, turn a area or neighborhood into something resembling the country they left, the third world, with vendors on the streets, crowded homes, destroyed and broken infrastructure, not speaking the language. It's almost like you cross a certain street or you cross a certain county or city line, and it's like you left the United States. And on top of that, a lot of these people, and I know for a fact, send money back to their home country. And I get it, you have families and you want to take care of them and all that stuff. That makes sense. However, that's what colonies do. They colonize an area, and the parent country, they have their flags up, the area looks like it, and they send their taxes and money back to the parent country so the parent country can benefit. Sounds like a colony, which I find incredibly ironic because a lot of these leftists and liberals and people who are all for this open borders, no one's illegal, always accuse the United States and Western European countries of colonialism and imperialism when they're the ones actually doing it. And I would argue, coming from parents who came to this country legally, my mother and father had work visas, they ended up becoming American citizens, getting married, and then having me. But I would argue citizens from other countries that immigrate to the United States, that follow the process, come here legally, don't cut the line, actually assimilate because they're appreciative, because they earned their citizenship. Whereas others who cut the line, come here illegally, didn't earn it, so they don't care. I'll give you an example. If I or anyone will go to, say, another country like Japan for a job, the Japanese government and the job that you are working for will expect you to learn the language. You will have to learn Japanese. Of course, there'll be probably some kind of leeway, give you some time to assimilate, acclimate yourself to the culture, learn the language, but at a certain time period, you're expected to know the language and assimilate to the culture. Why isn't it the same here? Why do we have 10 different types of DMV forms and the English one is nowhere to be found? Which ultimately leads us to where we are now. A lot of us got involved into politics during 2020. We were locked down, things were crazy, things continue to be crazy, but a lot of us got involved in politics in 2020. That would be myself as well. And a lot of people will blame the Biden administration for allowing all these illegal immigrants to come into our country with an open border. Yes, That was a gigantic problem. It was a record number of illegal border crossings. 10 million accounted for, up to 20 million, some people say. However, this has been brewing underneath the surface for 50 to 60 years now, and we have reached its culmination. The system, the infrastructure, cannot handle the amount of people that have been let into this country unvetted, unfiltered, in mass, without assimilating, committing crimes, being anti-American, taking advantage of services provided by law-abiding, tax-paying citizens. And now we have foreign nationals holding a foreign sovereign nation's flag, occupying areas of our cities, attacking our federal officers and law enforcement. This is more than a colony. The colony has been here for 40 to 50 years, and it has turned into an occupying force, to an insurgency, and the last 4 years have been an invasion of reinforcements. I'm not trying to be hyperbolic, and I'm not trying to use extreme rhetoric. I'm going by definitions. Let me give you Merriam-Webster's definition of an insurgency. An insurgency is an organized rebellion or uprising by a group of people against an established authority, government, or occupying power, typically involving guerrilla warfare or subversive tactics to achieve political, social, or ideological goals. Sounds like an insurgency to me. Guerrilla warfare, subversive tactics, firework bombs, throwing cinder blocks and rocks and bricks at law enforcement. And speaking of overthrowing or undermining a government, how about inciting sedition? Democrats on the left constantly talk about January 6, January 6, January 6. The difference is January 6 at least was American citizens protesting the government. Were there a few people breaking windows and causing a ruckus? Sure. Do I condone that? Of course not. But I find it very rich that in this case, it's a peaceful protest and they're just expressing their rights. They're only destroying property. They're only trying to defend their rights. How could he send the National Guard against his citizens? Well, the definition of sedition is conduct or speech inciting rebellion or resistance against a government or established authority, often with the intent to undermine or overthrow it. My point is, this fits all the definitions of invasion, insurgency, sedition, and even terrorism. Do you still think the National Guard and the Marines are not warranted in this situation? Are you still okay with these illegal immigrants representing a completely different country, taking advantage of taxpayer dollars and destroying your cities and neighborhoods, turning them into war zones, and then before that, turning them into mini third world countries? All I can say is this isn't going to end well for anybody. This is very bad for our country. But for the purposes of this video, this is not going to end well for the Democrats, for Newsom, for Karen Bass, for the left, or for the liberals. This is not a position you want to take. It is wildly unpopular. 51% of the United States agrees with the deportations that the Trump administration is doing and with the border policy. And those are polls taken by CNN, MSNBC, YouGov, that are heavily skewed towards Democrat Party. So the numbers are probably higher than we're showing. 70% of the United States agrees with having a secure border.
Immigrant citizens, immigrant voters, foreign-born voters have gone tremendously to the right on this issue in 2024 and 2025 versus where they were in 2020. Closest to or trust more in immigration. You go back to 2020. Democrats, get this, held a 32-point lead on this issue. Immigrant voters were in the Democratic camp. Jump forward to 2024, 2025. Look at that shift, a 40-point shift to the right among immigrant voters. Republicans now lead on this issue by 8 points over Democrats, more so than any other group that I could find. The group of voters who became more hawkish on immigration were in fact immigrants themselves, immigrants who are registered to vote in this country.
So that's on that issue. How about how they feel about kind of traditionally, historically about Donald Trump?
Yeah, so, you see this shift and you go, what is going on underneath the hood? Well, take a look, Donald Trump. You remember when he first ran back in 2016. Immigrant voters are one of his weakest spots. But look at this. Trump's vote share in presidential election among, again, immigrant citizens, those who are registered to vote. Look at this. 2016, he got 36% of the vote. You go to 2020, 39% of the vote. Look at this. In 2024, all the way up to 47% of the vote. Some polls I looked at had him barely losing that vote. Some polls I looked at had him barely winning that vote. Again, there is no block of voters that shifted more to the right from 2020 to 2024 than immigrant voters, and Donald Trump, at least in some surveys, actually won that vote. On average, it's about equal. So there may be all this stuff, right, about undocumented immigrants and Trump being harsh on them, but immigrant voters themselves have increasingly liked Donald Trump and have increasingly moved to the right on immigration and into the Republican camp.
Well, then on that, what you're getting at, how immigrant citizens, voters, feel about people in the country illegally.
Yeah, and this is where it all kind of comes together, Kate Baldwin. Look at this. The net favorable rating, immigrants who are here illegally, among immigrant citizens, again, those registered to vote. In 2020, look at this, plus 23 points on the net favorable rating. But look at where we were in 2024, minus 6 points, underwater. So immigrant citizens have become increasingly unfavorable in their views of those immigrants who are here illegally. So I think it's so important when we're talking about this debate from a political angle to separate those out who are undocumented immigrants versus those who are here legally and those who are citizens and those who are voters, because that group of voters has felt increasingly distant from those immigrants who are here legally. And so again, when we're talking about this, at least from a political angle, this is why Donald Trump feels so comfortable, because in fact, amongst the group that you would think that would be most opposed to this, in fact, they become increasingly favorable, not just towards Donald Trump, but towards a Republican point of view on immigration and becoming distant from those immigrants who are here illegally.
And in the 2024 election between Kamala Harris and now President Donald Trump had a record number of voter turnout amongst Latinos, especially Latino men, Asian men as well. So it's even unpopular with immigrants of this country. Why do you think Kamala Harris tried to run as a border hawk during her campaign?
On the border, the choice is simple. Kamala Harris supports increasing the number of Border Patrol agents. Donald Trump blocked a bill to increase the number of Border Patrol agents. Kamala Harris supports investing in new technology to block fentanyl from entering the country. Donald Trump blocked funding for technology to block fentanyl from entering the country. Kamala Harris supports spending more money to stop human traffickers. Donald Trump blocked money to stop human traffickers. Kamala Harris prosecuted transnational gang members and got them sentenced to prison. Trump is trying to avoid being sentenced to prison. There's two choices in this election: the one who will fix our broken immigration system and the one who's trying to stop her.
Well, that aged like milk. I don't want to get too far into the weeds with this video, but you get the point. My only hope is that this isn't Summer of Love 2.0 and lasts 6 months. And it's 6 months of destruction, mayhem, looting, violence, and people losing their lives. People are tired of it. People just want to live their lives and be left alone. Like, comment, share this video, and possibly subscribe. I'll see you on the next one.